The first story I'm going to tell you is an original personal story, and I call it The Green Gables of Slapout. Now, I've lived in Oklahoma for 18 years, but I've only lived in Goodwill for 12 because I at first was living in Altus, Oklahoma, and then I received the job that I have now and moved to Goodwill, which is smack in the middle of the no man's land area, in case any of you have no idea where that is. Now, I love to explore and I love to photograph. And of course, because I was living in a brand new area, I wanted to see what the no man's land had. So one Saturday, I grabbed my camera, got in my car, and I decided to drive through the no man's land strip on my way to a lovely little town called Woodward. On the way there, I passed through a very, 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 very small town called Slapout. Now, let me give you an idea of how small Slapout is. Population is 8. There is only one building in the entire town, which is a rather large building. And in it is a garage, convenience store, restaurant, and dry cleaner, all in the same building. Well, I'm there driving with my camera, and I go through Slapout, and I notice off to the side of this big building, the only building in the entire town, mind you, were 2 cabooses. Now, one of them was a typical caboose from the BNSF Railway, but the other one was a caboose from the Rock Island Line. Now, the Rock Island Line is actually a national railway, but it's not as well known as the BNSF or Union Pacific. However, I had been in Oklahoma long enough to know that the Rock Island line had a very important part of railway history in the state of Oklahoma. And I had never seen a Rock Island caboose. I realized this may be the only time I ever get to see one, and I had to get out and I had to photograph it. So I pulled my car over, I got out, I grabbed my camera, and I was snapping pictures of this caboose from almost every angle. And as I walked around, I noticed off to the side, behind the big main building, was an abandoned house with green gables. Now, what was so unique about this house is normally when you see a house, there's gables all over the roof. You probably heard of the House of Seven Gables by Nathaniel Hawthorne. Well, this had 2 gables, and they were sticking out at the sides of the house. And this was very unique. I've seen houses with gables, but never like this. And because it was green, because most abandoned houses are white, I had to photograph it. So I went over and I started photographing this house from all different kinds of angles, because I especially wanted to get those gables in it because it was such a unique architecture. And as I was snapping pictures, I heard this voice say, "What the blankety blank are you doing?" And I turned around to see that there was this really big woman coming at me. She was not what one would consider obese. As a matter of fact, there was not an inch of fat on her. She was all muscle. This is the kind of woman you do not want to meet in a dark alley. And for some reason, my taking photographs of this house had angered her. So I explained to her that I was a professor at Oklahoma Panhandle State University, that I was very interested in historical buildings, particularly those that had unique architecture, and that I was also interested in the caboose from the Rock Island Line because It was such an important part of Oklahoma railway history. I took out my ID, I showed it to her. Once I showed her my ID, she calmed down. And she goes, "Oh, so you're really a professor? You're not some insurance guy taking pictures of the house." And I was like, "Oh, good heavens, no. The last thing I am is an insurance man." So once she was assured of that fact, she said, "Well, okay, now that I know who you are, if you're really interested in history, this house has a very intriguing history, and I think you should know about it." I was like, "Oh, really? So what is this history?" And she goes, "Well, as you can see, the house is abandoned." I said, "Yes." And she said, "It's been abandoned for quite some time. When I and my partner bought this land, that house had been sitting there. And according to all of the old timers, it had been there for quite some time. And we decided we needed to go in and look at the house, see what it was. So we went into the house, and the house had not been lived in for a long, long time. Everything was just covered in dust. But what was unique about this was as we went into the house, we walked into kind of a living room, and off to the side was obviously a dining area. And there was this long table, and it had a tablecloth on it, and it had all of the dishes sitting out as if someone was about to sit down to a meal and never did. We looked around the house, the furniture, everything was still there. So then we decided to climb the stairs up to the second story to see what was up there. Now, we noticed these stairs were made out of wood, and we were a little worried that they may not be completely stable. So we climbed these stairs one at a time. So I went up first, my partner came up afterwards. We got up into the second story, and there were bedrooms. Furniture was still there. The beds had been made. Clothes were still hanging in the closets. It was almost as if somebody was living there and something happened that they had to leave this house in a hurry. And for some reason, they never came back. And of course, I was fascinated in this because my imagination was like, what could have happened to these people? And she says, so afterwards, we looked at it and we realized that whoever had lived in this house for some reason had to leave it. So we came back down the stairs, and once again, I went down first. My partner came down after me. And just as we were walking out the door, the stairwell crashed to the ground, sending a flock of dust everywhere. And we decided the house was too unsafe to ever go back in again. So we padlocked it. And that house has never been opened since. And to this day, right now, those dishes, those clothes, all that furniture still sits there. And we talked to all of the old timers. Nobody has any idea who used to live there or why it was left there. I thought that was rather intriguing. And I decided I was going to do some research on it. But I was never able to find out who had lived there, why they had to leave. Well, one day, I drove through Slapout again. The house and the cabooses were gone. I went into the store and I asked, what happened to the house that was behind here? And they said, oh, it's been leveled. It was completely destroyed. And I says, what about all of the dishes and everything that was in it? Says, I don't know anything about that. I'm guessing it was probably destroyed when they leveled the house. That house no longer exists. But in spite of the fact that that house is no longer there, to this day, I still wonder who lived in that house. Why did they leave? And why did they never return? Now, I do have one other story, which is very short, that I would like to conclude with. Now, once upon a time, I guess you could say, there lived a farmer. And he had a lot of chickens. And he loved to raise chickens. Well, one day he's out gathering up the eggs, and he notices in this one nest was a big egg. He couldn't imagine any chicken laying such a big egg. So he wondered what on earth could be inside that egg. And he figured the only way he could figure this out was he had to hatch it. So he took the egg, he put it in an incubator, and every day he would watch it. And then one day the egg hatched. And there was the ugliest looking bird he had ever seen in his life. It wasn't a beautiful chick like all of the other baby chicks are. It was hideous looking. And he thought, oh, this can't be a chicken. But it was in a chicken nest. Maybe it's some kind of weird chicken I don't know about. So he took the chick out. And sure enough, the chicken sat there, watched all the bird, whatever it was, sat there and watched all the other chickens. Pretty soon he started pecking on the ground like the chickens do, start scratching like the chickens do. So, well, it's got to be a chicken. It acts just like one. Got to be a chicken. It's just got to be a strange chicken. And life went on like that until one day a man happened to stop by the house. And as it turned out, this man was an ornithologist, a man who studied birds. And he looked at that and he said, what on earth is that eagle doing with all your chickens? And the farmer looked at him and says, that's not an eagle. That's a chicken. Look at it. Look at the way it behaves. It pecks like a chicken. It scratches like a chicken. It's a chicken. He said, no. That is an eagle. And I can prove that to you. So he walks over, he picks up this bird, and he puts it on top of a fence post. And then he takes the bird's head and he points it at the sky. And he says, you're an eagle. Fly. And the eagle looked at the sky. The bird looked at the sky, looked down at the chickens, looked at the sky again, looked back down at the chickens, hopped down off the fence post and started pecking and scratching like a chicken. And the farmer says, see, I told you it's a chicken. The ornithologist said, no, it's an eagle. I'm going to prove it. So this time he takes the bird and up on top of the roof of the barn, and the farmer climbs up there with him. And he does the same thing as before. He takes the bird's head, he points it at the sky. And he says, you are an eagle. Fly. Well, the bird looked at the sky, looked down the ground, and could see the chickens still pecking and scratching. Looked at the sky once again, looked down and saw the chickens. Jumped down off the barn and started pecking and scratching like the chickens. And the farmer said, see, I told you it's a chicken. He said, no, this is an eagle. And this time I'm really going to show you that this is an eagle. So they get down off the barn, they pick up the bird and they take it up on the mountain. And the ornithologist finds this great big boulder sticking up out of the mountain. And he sets the bird on top of it. And he takes the bird's head and he points it to the sky. And he says, "You are an eagle. Fly." Well, the bird, he looks at the sky, looks down at the ground. But this time, there's no chickens. He looks back up at the sky, looks down at the ground. There's no chickens. Looks up at the sky again, and all of a sudden, he starts to flap his wings, slowly at first, and then starts flapping them faster and stronger. He jumps off the boulder, and instead of landing on the ground, he starts to fly through the air. He goes up into the clouds. He goes up above the trees. He's soaring beautifully. He never comes back. And the ornithologist looked at him and says, "See, that is an eagle." The moral of the story is, if you want to soar with the eagles, you got to stop pecking and scratching with the chickens.